The will would not open. I had watched my father sign 100 decrees in that hall, watched the wax take his seal under candlelight while the pack held its breath. Now he was 3 days in the ground, and the parchment that carried his last words lay on the black stone before me, and the final clause, a single folded page, bound shut with his moon seal, would not give. Old Marin, who had kept my father's records for 40 years, pressed his thumb to the wax and murmured the release words. Nothing. He pressed again, harder, his knuckles whitening. The seal held as if it had been poured that morning and left to set for 1,000 winters. "Read the rest," I said. My voice came out low. Grief does that, it steals the top of a man's voice and leaves only the floor of it. So Marin read the rest. The holdings went as they should. The northern grazing lands, the mill on the Duskwater, the old hunting lodge, all named, all sensible, all my father. The court leaned in and out with each clause like a tide. My betrothed sat at my right hand in gray silk, Seraphine of the veil, and her fingers were already counting what would be hers when the matrite was done. And then Marin reached the sealed page, and could not open it, and read instead the line my father had left in the plain margin above the wax, for anyone to see. To the one my son cannot yet see, her name is within. Let the pack witness that I saw her first. The hall went very still, then someone laughed. It was a small laugh, quickly swallowed, but in a silent room a small laugh carries like a thrown stone. I turned my head. It had come from the low benches, from the direction of the kitchen folk and the hall servants who had been let in to hear their old king's wishes, as was the custom. "Bring the page here," I said. Marin carried it up and set it in my hands. I felt the weight of it, no more than any page, and I pressed my own thumb to my father's seal, because I was his blood and his heir, and the seal knew my blood if it knew anyone's. The wax did not so much as warm. I have led warriors across ice. I have stood over the bodies of men I loved and not let my hands shake, but something about that cold, closed page, my father reaching out of the dark with a name I could not read, put a pressure behind my sternum that I had no word for. Not my wolf rising, quieter than that and stranger. A pull, as if the page were a door and I was standing on the wrong side of it. "Whose name?" said Seraphine, in the smooth voice she used when she had decided a thing was beneath her. "Would the late king seal away like a treasure and hand to a room full of servants?" She smiled at the court, inviting them to share the joke. Perhaps he meant a favored hound. The court gave her the laugh she wanted. I did not. I was looking at the low benches. I was looking at a girl who was not laughing. She sat at the end of the servants' row with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes down, the way the overlooked learn to sit so they will not be noticed and given more work. A kitchen maid. I had seen her 100 times without seeing her carrying water, banking the great hall fire before dawn, slipping along the edges of rooms. Plain gray dress, sleeves worn thin at the elbow, a burn-marked scar along one wrist from years of ovens. Her hair was the brown of winter fields. She was not weeping and she was not laughing and she was not counting anything. She only sat, and when the laughter rolled toward her she did not flinch from it, which is a harder thing than it sounds. "You," I said, "at the end of the bench, look at me." She lifted her eyes. I want to tell you that in that moment the seal blazed and the truth was plain, and I knew. It was not like that. What happened was smaller, and it undid me more completely for being small. A name surfaced in me. Not a name I read, a name I already had, the way you carry the shape of a room you grew up in and could walk it blind. It rose behind my ribs and sat there, and I did not yet know it was hers, and I could not have said it aloud, and I have never in my life been more certain of anything than that I had been carrying it a long time without knowing. "What is your name?" I said. "Elira, my lord," steady. Not a beggar's voice, not a schemer's sweetened for the throne, just a voice low and even, the voice of someone used to being answered with more work and no thanks. "How long have you served this hall?" "Since I was 14, my lord, 11 winters." Seraphine turned her gray silk toward me. Kaelin, it is a kitchen girl. Your father was ill a long time at the end. The dying reach for strange comforts. She laid her hand near mine on the black stone, not quite touching. Let Marin burn the page. It spares her embarrassment and yours. No one burns my father's last words, I said, and I heard the hall go quiet again, because I had not raised my voice, and men had learned that when I did not raise my voice was when they should be most careful. I stood. The court stood with me, a rustle of silk and wool and iron. I held the sealed page and I looked at the girl called Elira, and I could not have told you why my hands were not entirely steady. Court is ended for today, I said. Elira of the kitchens, you will not go back to the ovens tonight. You will be given a room and a guard at the door, not a captor's guard, I added because I saw her go still, a keeper's. No one touches her, no one questions her, no one sends her away. Tomorrow we will learn what my father meant. I did not sleep. I sat in my father's study, mine now, though I could not think it, with the sealed page on the desk and a single candle burning down, and I turned the thing over and over in my hands. His moon seal stared back at me unbroken. I knew that seal. As a boy I had watched him warm the wax at that very candle and press it down and let me blow on it to cool. It had closed treaties and pardons and death sentences. It had never in my memory refused him or his blood. Toward the deep of the night old Marin came in without knocking, which he had earned the right to do across 2 reigns, and set a cup of hot spiced wine at my elbow, and lowered himself into the chair across from me with the care of old bones. You knew, I said. You wrote his letters at the end. You knew he had put a name in that will. I knew he sealed a page, Marin said. I did not know the name. He would not tell me. He made me leave the room to write it. The old man wrapped both hands around his own cup. Kaelin, there is a thing you should know about your father's last 2 years, and I have held it because he asked me to hold it, and now he is gone and the holding does you harm. Then say it. He was searching for someone. Marin's eyes went to the dark window. Quietly. He sent no heralds, raised no banners. He rode out alone more than a king should to villages that had no reason to see their king. He read the old bloodline rolls until his eyes failed him, and then he had me read them to him. He was looking for one person, and he never told me who, and I thought at the end the sickness had taken his reason. He looked back at me. I began to think it had not. I did not answer. I was watching the candle flame move on the wax seal, and I was thinking of a girl who sat at the end of a bench and did not flinch. There is one more thing, Marin said, quieter. In his last months, when the pain was bad and he would let almost no one near him, you remember, he sent his own healers away. He sent me away. He could not bear to be tended. There was one he allowed. The old man's throat worked. A kitchen girl. She brought his broth and she stayed to steady his hand when it shook too badly to hold the cup, and she never spoke of it, and she asked for nothing, and I only knew because I saw her leaving his chamber at hours. No kitchen girl should be walking the keep. He met my eyes. I did not know her name until today, my lord. It was Elira. The candle guttered. I set the page down very carefully, as a man sets down a thing he is suddenly afraid to break. My father had died with almost no one permitted to touch him, and the one hand he had allowed near him at the end was the hand of a girl the court had laughed at that very afternoon. I found her the next morning in the gray light before the hall woke, because I could not wait for the court and its silks and its schemes. She was not in the room I had given her. She was where I should have known to look, in the great hall, kneeling at the cold hearth, laying the morning fire. You were given a room, I said from the doorway. She did not startle. She finished setting the last split log before she rose and turned and inclined her head. Old habits, my lord. The hall is cold when the fire goes out overnight. I did not think anyone would begrudge it being lit. You tended my father. I had meant to lead into it. I did not. At the end, when he let no one else near. Something moved across her face then, the first crack I had seen in her stillness. Not fear. Grief, plain and unhidden. the grief of someone who has lost a person and has had no leave to mourn them, because who mourns a king in a kitchen? He was in pain, she said, and proud. He did not want to be seen weak. It is easier sometimes to be weak in front of someone who is nothing to anyone, no one to carry the story back to the court. A breath. I was nothing to anyone, so he let me stay. I would have stayed anyway. Why? Because he was kind to me once when I was 14 and new and frightened, and no one else in this whole cold hall had been. She said it simply, without weight, a fact she had carried a long time. You pay a kindness like that back however you can. I could steady a cup, so I steadied a cup. I stood there in the doorway of my own hall, and felt something in my chest turn over that I did not have a name for. He was looking for someone, I said. In his last years, do you know who? No, my lord. And I believed her because she did not reach for it, did not lean toward the possibility that it might be her, the way a schemer would have. She only looked tired and sad. He talked near the end when the fever was on him. He talked about the moon a great deal, about a debt he meant to pay before he died and was afraid he would not live to pay it. She shook her head. I thought it was the fever. Come with me, I said. I took her to the study. I set the sealed page in front of her on the desk where I had turned it 100 times in the night, and I said, "Open it." She looked at it and at me, and I saw her understand what I was asking and refuse to hope for it, all in the same instant. My lord, I am a kitchen maid. If the seal would not answer your own blood. Open it, I said again, and I heard how it came out, not a command, nearly a plea, please. Aplha reached out and laid her hand flat on my father's seal. And the wax woke. I have no better word. It did not burst or flare or throw light to the ceiling like something out of a hearth tale. It softened, the way frost softens under morning sun, quietly and all at once, and the moon seal parted down its middle with a sound no louder than a held breath let go, and the page fell open under her fingers as if it had only ever been waiting for the right hand to ask. She snatched her hand back as though the desk had burned her. It had not. She was staring at the open page and her face had gone white. I stepped around the desk. My father's hand was on the page, his true hand, the strong slanted script of before the illness took his fingers, which meant he had written this early, which meant he had known early, which meant for 2 years he had carried this and searched and hidden it and paid a girl's kindness back in secret and died with it still sealed, because he did not trust that his son would see her without proof the pack could not deny. I read it aloud, because she was shaking too hard to read it, and because I wanted to hear it in the room. To my son Kalen, who will read this when I am gone. You will have looked at her 100 times and seen a kitchen maid. So did I, the first year. Then the old moon rolls led me to a village burned out 20 years ago, and to a bloodline everyone believed ended in the fire, and to a child who had been carried out of that fire as an infant and given to a hall as a servant, so that no one who wanted that bloodline dead would ever think to look in a kitchen. She is the last of the moon-blessed line of Averholt. Her blood is the reason this seal opens for her and no other. I bound it to her the year I found her, and to no one else living, so that no false mate could ever be set beside you and no true one ever denied. The seal cannot be fooled. It has just told you what I could not make you believe with words. She is your fated mate, Kalen. I have watched the two of you cross the same hall for a year and never meet. I meant to give you to each other with my own hands, at the proper feast, before the whole pack. The sickness has decided otherwise. So I do it this way. Let the pack witness that I saw her first. I saw her worth when she was a girl steadying a dying man's cup and asking nothing. And let no one in that hall who ever laughed at her forget that their old king named her before them all. Be kinder than the world was to her. That is my whole estate to you. Everything else is only land. I stopped reading. The study was very quiet. Aplha had both hands pressed over her mouth and tears standing in her eyes and not falling. That same stillness, that same refusal to let the world see her break. And I understood now that it was not coldness and never had been. It was armor, worn since she was 14 and frightened and given only work and no kindness. And my father had seen through it in a way I, who called myself her king, had walked past 100 times. The name that had been sitting behind my ribs since the moment she lifted her eyes in the hall spoke itself at last, and it was hers, and it had always been hers. "Alira," I said. "I did not know," she whispered. "My lord, I swear on his grave, I only steadied a cup. I never knew what I never wanted." "I know." I came around the desk. I did not reach for her. She had been reached for too much and asked for too little, and I would not be one more hand that took. I only stood where she could see my face. "I know you didn't. That's how I know it's true. A schemer would have wept for the court yesterday. You sat at the end of a bench and let them laugh." "He was kind to me," she said, and now the tears came finally, quietly. "That is all. He was kind to me one time and I loved him for it like he was my own, and now everyone will think I—" "No one will think anything," I said, "but what I make them think. And I am the Alpha King of Duskmore, and my father's seal has just opened in your hand in front of no one but me, and it will open in front of all of them next, because you should not have to spend one more day being laughed at in a hall that owes you a debt it does not even know it carries." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, the burn scar pale on her wrist, and looked at me with something I had not earned yet and was suddenly desperate to. "You don't know me," she said, "not an accusation, a warning, an honest one. A seal is not a heart. You have looked past me for a year, my lord. A page does not change that." She was right, and I loved her a little for saying it, and I have loved her more every year since for the fact that she said it. "No," I agreed. "A page changes nothing, so I will not ask you for anything today but this. Stand beside me in the hall while I read my father's words to the pack, so that not one of them can ever laugh at you again. After that you owe me nothing. If you want to walk out of Duskmore a free woman with land and a name and never see my face, my father's estate will carry you anywhere you wish to go, and I will send a guard to see you safe, and I will never come after you." I found it was hard to say, and I said it anyway. "The seal chose, but you should get to choose too. He'd have wanted that. He gave you the cup to hold, he didn't force your hand to it." Alira looked at me a long moment. "You are not what the court thinks you are either," she said slowly. "They think you are cold." "I am mostly." "No." The smallest thing happened at the corner of her mouth, not a smile, the promise of the country where smiles are grown. "You are grieving, and you are afraid you'll fail him, and you have just offered to let me leave when any other king would have kept me. That is not cold." She drew a breath and squared her thin shoulders in the worn gray dress. "I'll stand beside you in the hall, not because a seal opened. Because he asked you to be kinder than the world was to me, and you are already trying, and I would like to see how that turns out." The court was fuller that afternoon than it had been in years, because word runs through a keep like fire through dry grass, and every soul in Duskmore wanted to see whether the new Alpha King would burn the kitchen girl's name or bless it. Seraphine of the Vale had dressed for a coronation of her own. She sat at my right hand in silver now, not gray, and she had arranged her face into gracious patience, the expression of a woman certain the morning would end with a foolish page burned and her own place secured. I did not sit. I stood before my father's court with his opened will in my hands, and beside me, a step down because she had insisted, because she said she would not stand level with a king she had known one day, and I let her have it because it was hers to choose, stood Alira in the same worn gray dress, having refused the finery I offered, because, she said, she would be seen as she truly was or not at all. "Yesterday," I said, "my father's last will named a name none of you could read, and one of you laughed." I let that sit. I did not look at Seraphine. I did not have to. The whole court did it for me. The seal that closed that page was bound by my father to a single bloodline, so that no false mate could ever be set beside your king and no true one ever denied. It would not open for me. It would not open for Marin, who served 2 reigns. It opened this morning for the hand of Alira of the Kitchens, because she is not, and never was, only a kitchen maid. I read them the will, all of it, the burned village, the rescued infant, the last moon-blessed daughter of a Verholt, hidden in a hall as a servant so that the men who wanted her lying dead would never think to look for a princess scrubbing an oven. My father's 2 years of searching, the debt he meant to pay. Let the pack witness that I saw her first. When I finished, there was no laughter. There was the particular silence of a great many people rearranging, all at once, everything they had believed about someone they had walked past for years. I sold, a voice began and stopped. It was the head cook, an honest hard woman gone gray in that kitchen, and her face had crumpled. I sent her out in the cold to fetch water when the well froze, she said, to no one, to herself, to Aplha. I gave her the worst of every task because she never complained. Moon, forgive me, I never. You did not know, Aplha said, and her voice carried gently across the whole hall, and it was the first time most of them had ever heard her speak. None of you knew. He kept it from you to keep me alive. There is nothing here to forgive. She looked at the old cook, and something passed between two women who had shared 11 winters of the same cold hall. You gave me the worst tasks. You also gave me bread the night I came when I was 14 and had nothing. I remember that too. I watched Seraphine of the Veil rise from the seat at my right hand. She was too proud to rage and too clever to plead, and I will grant her this. She knew a lost field when she stood in one. She smoothed her silver silk and inclined her head, first to me, and then, after a visible cost, to Aplha. It seems, she said, the late king has settled a question I came here believing already answered. A thin smile. I wish you both the joy of it. And she gathered her people and left the hall with her spine straight, and I did not stop her, because a humbling that a person walks out of on their own feet is a more lasting one than any I could have handed down. The court bowed then, not to me, to her. A long, slow bend of the whole hall, the wolves of Duskmore lowering their heads to the last daughter of a Verholt who had banked their fires before dawn for 11 years. And Aplha stood in her worn gray dress and did not weep and did not flinch, and let herself, for the first time in her life, simply be seen. I did not make her my Luna that day. I know that is how these tales are meant to end, the crown set on the deserving head, the whole pack roaring her name. But my father's last words to me were not make her your queen. They were be kinder than the world was to her. And a crown pressed onto a woman one day after she learns her whole life was a hidden thing is not kindness. It is only another hand taking. So I gave her time. I gave her the freedom I had promised, the land, the name, the guard, the open gate. And she did not take the gate. She stayed, and she learned the hall from the throne end instead of the hearth end, and I learned her, slowly, the way my father must have wanted me to, not as a seal's answer but as a person. Her dry humor, which she had kept hidden under all that stillness. The way she still could not sleep past the hour the great hall fire needed banking, and would slip down some mornings to lay it herself, and how I took to slipping down to sit with her while she did it, two people who could not sleep, feeding a fire in the dark before a cold court woke. It was there, one such morning, months on, that she set the last log and turned and found me watching her, and did not look away. You keep coming down here, she said. You keep lighting this fire. Old habits. Mine's newer, I said, but I find I can't sleep either unless I know how the morning starts. She crossed the cold flagstones and stood in front of me, and she took my hand. She reached for me, the first time in her life she had reached for anything and asked it to be hers, and turned it over, and pressed her palm flat to mine the way she had pressed it to a sealed page in the dark of my father's study. I'm not the last daughter of a burned village this morning, she said. I'm just a woman who has known you half a year and has decided she would like to know you the rest of her life, if you'll have the plain version of me and not the one the seal made grand. The seal never made you grand, I said. You were grand at the end of a bench letting them laugh. We were married at the turn of the year, in the great hall, before the same court that had laughed, though not one of them laughed now. And my father's opened will hung framed above the hearth she had banked for 11 winters. his true strong hand plain for the whole pack to read, so that no one who came after us would ever forget that a dying king saw a kitchen maid's worth 2 years before his son did. I keep his moon seal in the study still. It is broken down the middle where it woke under her hand, and it will never close again, and I would not mend it if I could. Some nights late, when the hall is quiet and she has finally learned to sleep past dawn, I take it out and hold it and think of a proud dying man who could let only one gentle hand near him, and who spent the last strength of his life making sure that hand would never be laughed at again. "Everything else is only land," he wrote. He was right, it was. I have told you how the seal opened and how the court bowed, and how I did not put a crown on her that day. What I have not told you is what came after, the long middle where a mystery becomes a life, and where a debt I did not know my house owed came looking for the woman my father had hidden so carefully. So let me go back and tell it the slow way, the way it deserves to be told. Begin with the morning after the second reading, the one where the whole court bent to her. I woke before the fire bell, which was not unusual for me in those weeks, and I went down to the great hall out of a habit I had already begun to build without admitting it, and she was not there. The hearth was cold. For the first time in 11 winters, by the head cook's own later reckoning, the great hall fire had not been laid before dawn. I felt it like a dropped stone. I told myself she was only sleeping. She had, after all, earned a lifetime of sleeping past the fire bell in a single afternoon. But the hall without her small kneeling shape at the hearth felt wrong in a way I could not talk myself out of, and I went looking, and I found her not gone, not fled, but standing at the tall east window of the corridor above the kitchens, wrapped in a cloak, watching the sky go from black to gray. "You didn't lay the fire," I said. I couldn't decide if I was allowed to anymore. She did not turn from the window. Yesterday I was a kitchen maid and it was my task. Today I am the last daughter of a Verholt and it is beneath me, apparently. And there is a girl of 15 down there they've already told to do it in my place, and she doesn't know how yet she'll bank it too high and smoke the whole hall. A breath that was almost a laugh, almost not. I have known who I am for one day, my lord, and already I do not know where to put my hands. I came and stood at the window beside her, not too close. "My father hid you in a kitchen for 20 years, I said, so that no one would ever look for a princess with soot on her hands. It worked. You are alive because of it. But it also means the only place you have ever felt sure of yourself is at that hearth, and now the whole hall has decided that place is beneath you and no one asked you." I looked at the gray coming up over the duskwater. "So let me ask you, do you want to go lay the fire?" She looked at me then, and there was something raw in it. "You would let the woman your father's will named, kneel at a hearth in front of the court like a servant." "I would let you do the thing that makes you feel like yourself," I said, "and let the court adjust its notions. They have a great deal of adjusting to do this week regardless. What is one more thing?" So she went down, and she showed the frightened 15-year-old how to split the draw so the fire caught low and clean and did not smoke. And by the time the court came in to break its fast, there sat the last daughter of a Verholt with ash on her sleeve, teaching a kitchen girl to lay a fire. And I watched 3 of my counselors not know where to look, and I found I enjoyed it more than was strictly dignified. That was the shape of those first weeks. Her learning that she was allowed to be both, the hidden princess and the woman who knew how a fire was laid, and me learning that I had spent a year sharing a roof with someone I had never once looked at, and that the looking, now that I had begun, was not a thing I wanted to stop doing. But I have run ahead of the mystery, and there was more mystery, because a hidden bloodline is never hidden only for sentiment. Someone hides it from someone, and that someone, I would learn, was not 20 years dead in a burned village. That someone was still very much alive, and had spent 2 decades believing the Verholt line was ash, and did not care at all for the news that ran out of Duskmore that spring. That the last daughter of the moon-blessed line was alive, named in a dead king's will, and standing beside the Alpha King of the North. The first sign of it came as such things do, small and easy to miss. A rider came to Duskmore's gate under a merchant's colors, asking after grain prices, staying 2 nights, asking also, quietly, of stable hands and washing women, the sort of people a lord thinks are deaf, whether it was true, the story about the kitchen girl and the old king's will, whether she truly bore the Averholt mark, whether she was truly the one from the fire. Marin brought this to me. Old Marin missed very little. 40 years of keeping a king's records teaches a man to notice which questions are asked by whom. A merchant does not care whether a maid bears a moon mark, Marin said, laying the stable master's report on my desk. A merchant cares whether she'll drive up the price of his flour. This one asked about flour once and about her a dozen times, and he rode south when he left, my lord. Not east to the grain markets, south, toward the Vale. Toward the Vale, where Seraphine's people held their lands. I did not want it to be Seraphine. Not because I bore her love, I did not and never had. Ours was a match of councils and borders, and her leaving my hall had cost me nothing but a treaty I would have to mend some other way. I did not want it to be her because it was too easy, and easy answers in matters of murder are usually wrong, and this, a writer asking whether a hidden princess truly lived, smelled of murder to me, or the careful frontwork of it. Say nothing to Alira yet, I told Marin. She has had one earthquake this month. I'll not hand her a second on a stable hand's rumor. Find out who the rider was. Find out who the Averholt fire truly served 20 years ago. My father knew. It's in his rolls somewhere, and if he knew, it's written. It was written. It took Marin 9 days in the old muniment room, his eyes failing over my father's crabbed later hand. But he found it, and what he found turned the whole tale on its edge. The Averholt line had not been destroyed by some faceless enemy in a border war, as the common telling had it. Averholt had been a small moon-blessed hold to the south, its daughters known for a rare thing, a true sight, a way of reading the moon-bound bonds themselves, of knowing a false mate claim from a true one on sight. In an age of arranged matches and contested successions, a bloodline that could look at 2 people and say the bond is real or the bond is a lie was not a curiosity. It was a threat. Because whoever held such a daughter could legitimize any claim, and whoever wanted to legitimize a false claim needed such daughters gone. 20 years passed, a southern house had wanted exactly that, a false mate claim pressed onto a wealthy succession, an inconvenient, true-sighted family standing in the way. So Averholt burned. Every daughter of the line, the arsonists believed, burned with it. Every daughter but one. An infant, carried out through the smoke by a fleeing servant, given for safekeeping to a passing lord of the north who happened to be traveling home from a council, and happened to stop at a burning village and happened to pull a servant and a baby from a ditch. That lord was my father, young then, not yet king. He had not known what he carried. He had only known he would not leave a child in a ditch. He gave the infant to his own household as a foundling, a kitchen ward, and thought no more of it for 18 years. Until the pain of his last illness sent him back through the old moon rolls looking, Marin thought, for something to leave undone things settled. And he read the Averholt story, and read the servant's name, and remembered a ditch, and a fire, and a baby, and did the sum. He found her twice, I said, when Marin had finished. Once from a ditch when she was a week old, once from a book when he was dying, and both times he told no one because both times telling would have gotten her killed. The house that burned Averholt, Marin said heavily, is not gone, my lord. It rose on the strength of the false claim it bought with that fire. It sits on a great southern estate to this day, and it has just heard by every road that runs out of your gate that the one witness it thought it had burned to ash is alive, grown, named before a king's court, and worse for them, that she is the true-sighted heir of the very line that could unmake the lie their whole house is built on. I sat with that a long time. The candle burned, and I understood at last and completely why my father had sealed her name in wax bound to her own blood and handed it to a hall full of servants with a line in the margin, "Let the pack witness that I saw her first." He had not done it for sentiment or for pageantry. He had done it so that if he died before he could protect her, as he did her existence, and her claim would be spoken aloud, before witnesses, sealed by a proof no one could forge, and could never again be quietly made to disappear. A secret can be murdered. A thing the whole pack has witnessed cannot. My father, dying, in pain, with his hands failing, had built her a wall out of the only stone he had left. The truth, spoken loud enough that killing her could no longer unsay it. I told her that night. I had promised myself I would not hand her a second earthquake, but this was not a thing a woman had the right to be kept from, that there were people who wanted her dead, and had for 20 years, and now knew where to find her. She deserved to choose her own ground with open eyes. She took it better than I did. We were in the study. It had become our study by then. In the unspoken way rooms become shared, and I told her all of it. The true side of her line, the false claim, the fire, the house in the South that had built its wealth on her family's ash and had just learned she lived. I watched her face and braced for fear. What came was not fear. It was a slow, cold, steadying anger, and under it grief. "So that is what I am for," she said quietly. "Not a princess, a witness, a thing to be burned so a lie could stand." She looked at her own hands, the burn scar pale on her wrist. "My whole family, my lord, my mother, my grandmother, aunts, sisters I never met, an entire bloodline, burned in a night so that some southern house could marry its heir to a fortune and swear the bond was true when it was not." She raised her eyes, and they were dry and terrible. "And I have been laying fires in a kitchen, while the people who did it grew fat on the lie." "You didn't know," I said. "You couldn't have." "I know I couldn't have. That is not the same as it being bearable." She stood and crossed to the window. The same restless motion I had learned meant she was thinking hardest. "The true sight. Do I have it? Your father's rolls say the daughters of a Verholt could read a bond true from false. I have never. I would not know what that even feels like." "I don't know," I said honestly. "You've never been tested. There was never a reason." She was quiet a moment. Then she turned, and there was something new in her, a straightening, as if a thing that had been hidden even from herself had just been named and could now stand up. "There is a reason now," she said. "If I am truly the last true-sighted daughter of a Verholt, then I am the one living person who can look at the false claim that house built its name on and say, before witnesses, before the moon courts of the North, this bond was a lie. I can unmake in an hour of testimony what they burned a village to protect." Her jaw set. "They did not come to kill a princess. They came to kill a witness. So let me be the witness." Let me finish the sentence my mother's whole line died in the middle of. I looked at her. The kitchen maid the court had laughed at, standing in a dead king's study, proposing to walk south and testify against the house that had murdered her family. Using a gift she had never once tested and might not have, and I understood something my father had understood before me. She was not gentle instead of strong. She was gentle and unbreakable, and the world had mistaken the first for the whole of her because it had never once bothered to look for the second. "If you do this," I said, "you do it with the whole strength of Duskmore behind you, not as a lone witness they can burn on a road. As the named heir of a Verholt, mate bound before a king's court, riding under the banner of the Aplha king of the North, to give testimony no southern house dares touch." I came to stand before her. "They built a wall of secrecy around a lie for 20 years. We will build a wall of witness around the truth. Same stone my father used. More of it." "That is not a small thing you are offering," she said slowly. "To set your house against a southern house over a woman you have known 2 months and are not even wed to. The council will call it madness." "The council," I said, "may call it whatever it likes. My father pulled a servant and an infant from a burning ditch because he would not leave a child to die, and he never once asked whether it was politic. I find I am his son more than I am my council's king." I held her gaze. "But I will not spend your life to salve my honor. This is your family, your gift, your ground. If you want to walk away from the whole southern rot and live quiet and safe and long, I will build you the quietest, safest, longest life in the North and never speak the word of Verholt again." You choose. You always choose. That is the one thing I will never take from you." She looked at me for a long moment, and then she did the thing she had done in my father's study, the thing she had begun to do more often, the reaching. She took my hand and turned it over and pressed her palm flat to mine. "I choose the witness stand," she said, "and I choose to do it beside you, not because I need Duskmore's banner, though I'll take it gladly, because I have spent my whole life being the thing that survives quietly in the corner of someone else's story, and I am done surviving quietly. I would like for once to stand up. The testimony is a long tale, and I will not tell all of it, because much of it is law and moon court ritual and the dry machinery of a claim being unmade, and this is not a tale of law. But I will tell you the moment that mattered. We rode south in high summer, under my banner, with Marin and a full guard, and the sealed will itself carried in a locked case like the relic it had become. The Southern Moon Court convened at my formal petition, a petition no lord could refuse without seeming to admit he feared what a witness might say. The house that had burned a Verholt sat in that court in cloth of gold, secure in 20 years of a lie no living soul could contradict. And then a woman in a plain dark gown. She had refused finery again, though this time it was strategy as much as pride. "Let them see I have nothing to gain but the truth," she said, rose and named herself the last daughter of a Verholt, and asked to exercise the ancient right of her line, to look upon a mate claim and read it true or false before the assembled court. They tried to stop it. Of course they did. They called her a fraud, a kitchen girl coached by an ambitious northern king, a foundling with no proof of her blood. And I set the sealed will upon the court table, and I told the assembly how the moon seal bound to a single bloodline had woken and opened at her hand, and no others, before witnesses. And I invited any daughter of any other line present to try to open it, and none could. And then I invited her to close it and open it again there in that court. And she laid her scarred hand on the broken wax, and the two halves warmed and knit and parted again at her touch alone. And the court that had been ready to call her a fraud went very, very quiet. Then she turned to the head of the house in cloth of gold, and she looked at the marriage claim their whole fortune rested upon, the mate bond they had sworn true for 20 years. And the true sight of a Verholt woke in her for the first time in her life, because it had never before had a lie big enough to answer to. I watched it happen. I watched something move behind her eyes that I had no name for, an old inheritance stirring, and she went pale and then steady, and she said, in a voice that carried to every corner of that golden marble hall, "There is no bond here. There never was. This claim is a lie, and it has always been a lie, and my whole family was burned in a single night so that no one with the sight to see it could ever say so." She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. I am the one they missed, and I see it, and now so does this court. I have stood in many halls. I have never felt a silence like the one that fell in that southern court, the silence of a lie 20 years old collapsing all at once under the weight of the single witness it had failed to burn. The house in cloth of gold was unmade by law within the season. Not by my sword, I never drew it, but by her testimony, and the seal, and the truth spoken loud enough before enough witnesses that it could never again be quietly made to disappear. My father's stone. She had built her wall of it in the end, exactly as he had, and made it high enough to bury the fire that had taken her family. When we rode back north, she was quiet on the road for a long while, and I let her be, because some griefs need distance more than words. "I thought finishing it would feel like victory," she said at last, as Duskmore's towers came gray and welcome over the northern hills. "It doesn't. It feels like a grave I finally got to close properly. 20 years my family lay in an unmarked lie. Now at least the marker's straight." She looked over at me. "Your father did that. He pulled me from the fire, and then he pulled the truth from a book, and then he built me a wall out of witness so that I could live long enough to straighten my own family's grave. I never got to thank him." "You thanked him," I said. "Every night you steadied his cup when he was dying and asked for nothing. He knew. That's why he did it. A man doesn't burn his last strength building a wall around someone who was nothing to him. I reached over and for the first time I did the reaching. I took her hand off her saddle horn and turned it over and pressed my palm flat to hers, the way she had taught me without ever meaning to. You were never nothing to him. And you have not been nothing to me since the afternoon you sat at the end of a bench and let them laugh and didn't break. She closed her fingers around mine on the road north, and neither of us said anything more, and nothing more needed saying. We came home to a hall that had, in our absence, quietly rearranged its whole heart around her. The head cook, the gray-haired honest woman who had sent a 14-year-old out to fetch water from a frozen well, met us at the kitchen door when we returned, and she had made, of all things, the bread. The plain dark loaf she had given a frightened girl her first night in the hall 11 winters before. She pressed it into Alira's hands without a word, because some apologies are too large for words and must be baked instead. And Alira took it, and the two women stood there in the kitchen doorway holding a loaf of bread between them and both. At last, wept the old cook for 11 years of small, unknowing cruelties, and Alira for the one kindness underneath them all that she had never forgotten. You gave me bread when I had nothing, Alira said. I told the whole Southern court my family's truth this season. I could have told them that too, that in the coldest hall in the north, one woman gave a starving foundling bread on her first night and never knew what she was feeding. She held the loaf. You fed the last daughter of a Verholt and you didn't know it, and you did it anyway. That is the only kind of kindness that counts for anything. The old cook could not speak. She only gripped Alira's scarred hands in her flower-white ones and held on. We were married at the turn of the year, as I have said. But let me tell it properly this time, because it deserves more than the one line I gave it. We were married in the great hall, before the same court that had laughed, and not one of them laughed now, and many of them wept. Alira wore, in the end, a gown of deep northern blue, not finery for finery's sake, but a color, she said, that her mother's line had worn, a small thread of a Verholt woven back into the world. She would not wear a crown. I banked the fires of this hall for 11 winters, she said, and I would rather be married as the woman who did that than as a princess who never got to. So she carried, instead of a scepter, a single split log from the great hall hearth, and set it on the fire herself before she came to me, and the whole court watched the last daughter of a Verholt lay one final fire as a free woman and a chosen one. And it was the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, and I have seen dragons in the old wars. My father's opened will hung framed above that hearth, his true, strong, early hand plain for the whole pack to read, the moon seal broken down its middle where it had woken under her palm. It hangs there still. I meant it as a monument to him. She tells me it is a monument to what he saw, that Worth wears an apron as often as a crown, and that the surest way to know a person's true measure is to watch how they treat a dying man who can do nothing for them in return. The head cook made the wedding bread. The whole hall ate of it. The 15-year-old Alira had taught to lay a fire stood in the front rank, promoted now, beaming. Seraphine of the Veil did not come, but she sent, of all things, a gift, a length of southern silk in a Verholt blue, with a card in her own hand. The late king saw further than any of us. I was wrong to laugh, be happy. I was surprised by it, and then I was not. A proud woman who walks out of a lost field on her own feet is often, given time, the one most able to admit the field was lost fairly. We mended the border treaty by other means, and she and Alira became, in the slow northern way, something almost like friends, which surprised the whole court and no one more than the two of them. I keep my father's moon seal in the study still. It is broken down the middle where it woke under her hand, and it will never close again, and I would not mend it if I could. Some nights late, when the hall is quiet and she has finally, after all these years, learned to sleep past the fire bell, I take it out and hold the two cold halves and think of a proud dying man who could let only one gentle hand near him at the end. He spent the last strength of his life on 3 things: pulling the truth from a book, sealing a name in wax, and paying back a girl who steadied his cup. He never lived to see the will opened. He never saw the court bow, or the southern lie collapse, or the blue gown, or the bread. He only trusted that the truth, spoken loud enough before enough witnesses, would outlive him and do the work his failing hands could not. It did. Elira asked me once, on one of those late nights, what I thought he would say if he could see it: the hall, the marriage, the straightened grave, the two of us feeding a fire in the dark before a warm court woke. I did not have to think about it. He had already told me. It was the last line of the last thing he ever wrote, and I have it by heart, and I said it to her there in the firelight. Be kinder than the world was to her. That is my whole estate to you. Everything else is only land. He was right, it was. And every winter dawn, when I wake to find the far side of the bed already cold and go down to the great hall and find her kneeling at the hearth in the gray light, laying the morning fire out of a habit 11 winters deep, teaching, still, some frightened new girl how to split the draw so it catches clean. I think that of the whole vast estate my father left me, the land and the holdings and the crown, the only part I would fight the world to keep is that. The last daughter of a Verhold, safe and free and chosen, warming a hall that once let her freeze, with soot on her hands and no fear left in her at all. Everything else is only land.